Hello, welcome to a very special MinnMax exclusive episode. This is something that I feel like I've personally been building up to for 18 years. I believe
People
I was
have
10
been
years old.
Beating down our door. They're saying, you've got to do it. You can't put it off any longer.
Yes, you two have similar knowledge of something. It's time to get that on video, baby, and audio.
That's right.
I'm Leo Vader. Jacob Geller's with me.
Hi, I'm Jacob Geller.
Hi. We're here because we recently discovered that we share a common interest in a young adult book series called The Pendragon Adventure. Can you walk me through your introduction to this seminal 10-book saga?
Well, as everyone, I think I was a child and I judged books partially by their cover. Which I assume, how else are you supposed to pick a book? There's no other way.
Yeah.
And I saw this real nerdy looking one. I don't know, not particularly enigmatic, but it just kept popping up in like the tiny library that your classroom would have, where it's just like, we just got books on the shelf. And eventually I think I ran out of all the other books. And so I read Pendragon Book 1. The Merchant of Death, when I was in probably 6th grade, something like that. And was shocked to learn, despite the dorky ass book cover, really good, really involving. And then I kind of, according to Wikipedia, they came out between like 2002 and 2009, and I think I was reading them pretty much as they came out, which I didn't do for like many other young adult series other than like Harry Potter or something.
Yeah, I remember getting into the books at the Scholastic Book Fair one we had at school. Say it was Thursday and Friday of that week. I got the first one on Thursday, went home, blasted through it, went back on Friday and got the second one. And then from then on was waiting for each individual entry. And I believe I read along until the 7th one, until and through the 7th one, and then I never finished the series until very recently. I went back and reread all of them from the beginning over the past couple years between other books. But you read them all the way through, up to 10?
I read them all the way through. I mean, I have a very my clearest memory of buying one of these is my grandpa was in town and we were walking past the Barnes and Nobles, and I looked in the window and I saw Pendragon Book 6, The Rivers of Zada, was out, and I said, Grandpa, please buy me that book. And he said, why is there a picture of Michael Jackson on the cover? Which, if you look at it, it does indeed kind of look like post-transformation Michael Jackson. But it's like, that was in Barnes and Noble, so clearly it had just came out. And yeah, I own almost all of them. I think I probably, there's like one or two that I'm missing, but like when you ask if I want to do this, I said, Mom, please find Pendragon Book 10 in my old bedroom, and she delivered.
So, but you haven't reread them recently? What's your experience since they came out?
Oh, no. I mean, I read them through probably multiple times as a kid, and then just like on Tuesday, I went through and found the most complete summaries of each book I could find online and went through those. And let me tell you, was really taken back. Like, I am surprised kind of how much I forgot happened, but also how much like is locked in my memory of like, oh yeah, that was so cool. I remember the scene really specifically.
Yeah. Do you think that's the best way to go about it? Should we go chronologically through those books, talk about highs and lows?
I guess I kind of want to talk about, let's just give like, I don't know, an overview of like what it is, like what the kind of world building is.
Yeah, good idea. So I think it gripped me easily as a kid because it's very much young average boy. If anything, maybe a little above average, very talented young boy.
Good at basketball.
Yeah, good at basketball, good with ladies at age 14. Getting plucked from his normal life and getting taken on this adventure with his kooky uncle that I always imagined as my uncle. I don't know. Do you picture people in your life as the characters in books in general and in this? Because I feel like rereading them, I still pictured them as the same like friends from class that I originally did when I was reading them.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of one of the cool things about this series is that it hasn't been turned into a movie or a TV show or whatever. And so my mental pictures of what they looked like are basically still the pictures. You know, it's like it's not like, oh, now it's Emma Watson. You know, like that's what that character looks like. I still get to kind of retain the what I pictured them as when I was first reading it. And I mean, it was like, no matter what it said, Pendragon was always my age at all points. You know, like the main character was like, well, he's me, so obviously he's as old as I am. And now I think some of the covers draw him where he looks like he's like 9, where clearly he would be, you know, like older in the story. But yeah, I totally was envisioning, okay, this is me. The girl that he has a crush on is the girl that I have a crush on. Right. You know, so relatable.
For me, I always pictured myself as the best friend. Mark.
Oh, interesting.
Who is present from the very beginning and is Bobby's main point of contact, along with his crush, Courtney, when he's sending his journals back from these crazy places. And Mark, parentheses, the nerd, was my handle on the Pendragon Adventure forums, where I was a very active member, and in fact wrote a fan fiction, which we will get to later. Once we get to that, I was waiting for book 6 to come out, and so I wrote a fan fiction version of it. Incomplete, but
so funny.
Worth discussing once we get to that.
Yeah, okay, so his uncle picks him up. He's like, we gotta go on an adventure. They go to an abandoned subway station, or is it active, and then they just go in like an abandoned part of it? But they find, you know, this secret door, and behind it is this big, like, portal thing, and they yell out the name of like a different land, and the portal opens, and they kind of zoom through it, and go to this different place. And what you eventually find out is there are 10 kind of realities, 10
territories,
worlds.
They're called
Territories. Okay. Oh yeah. I had the Wikipedia like terminology section up. Yeah. So and they're all different, but they're connected, and their fates are kind of reliant on each other. And there are special people in each one that are the people who are like fated to travel between them. And so Bobby Pendragon, the main character, is like, he's the new one from Earth, and his uncle is like the old one. Yes,
the travelers. When they go to that train station is when you first meet the big villain of the franchise, Saint Dane, who can shapeshift. They meet like a cop waiting for them in the subway station, and Bobby's like, oh, we're screwed. We're getting busted for trespassing here, but then Uncle Press isn't scared, and then he transforms. You find out it's this guy, Saint Dane. He's the bad guy. He wants all the territories, which are each going through their own turning point. That's what each book is about. He wants to push them in the wrong direction, make people turn against each other, and have the turning point go a bad way.
There were two things that I was struck by while reminding myself of all of these plots. One, when I was reading it, I was like, Saint Dane, very normal name for a villain. Like, that's, you know, it's
combination
like,
of two
I don't
dogs'
think they
names.
really ever explain, like, he's not like a saint. It's not, you know, it's just kind of like the name that he has.
Well, that's also interesting. There's a little bit about that in the 10th book, but we will get to that.
Right. But also, he plays a very similar role to Count Olaf, in that in each book, they go to a different place, and then it's like, oh, and there's this guy who's disguised, and they almost immediately know often, like, that's the bad guy. That's, you know, we got to get him. But then everyone else is like, what are you talking about? That guy's been here forever. He's good. Like, don't worry yourself, which is like how every Series of Unfortunate Events book was also plotted.
That's so true. Those probably predate this, don't they? Series of Unfortunate Events.
I mean, I think they were coming out around the same time, but they probably started a little earlier. But were also aimed a little younger, I think.
That is an interesting similarity. The first book, they go to the territory of Let's pronounce it at the same time to hear how we each pronounce it. Do you remember the territory?
Oh, wait. I need to pull this up. Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Denderon.
Denderon.
Hey!
Okay, yeah.
My girlfriend pronounces it Denderon, and so I was just checking. But, brief break. Again, it's like the high point of my life to be discussing these books with another human being who's read them. This is wonderful. They go to Denderon, which is a pretty typical medieval class divide type of situation. You've got the lowly Malago miners who are getting abused horribly by the wealthy Bedouins who live in their big castle and have their villain who's presented very fatphobically by the author. Caught a lot more of that this reading.
But the author is Bobby Pendragon, so we can just say that he as a character is fatphobic. That's right. That's part of his
every character needs a good flaw, for sure. I think the interesting part of this I want to jump to, it's introducing us to like the traveler from here is Alder. He meets the traveler Lore from Zada, who will go to Zada later. But what's interesting is when Bobby is overcoming the challenges, he has been sending his journals back to Mark and Courtney throughout the book. Maybe just Mark at this point. But he asks Mark to like leave these electronics at the flume, like a radio and things he'll use as part of his plan to like blow these knights' minds with this future technology. And, he uses it to win the climax of the book, essentially. But one of the big rules is you're not supposed to mix territories. So it's a kind of a double-sided victory where Uncle Press is really mad at him for bringing stuff in from other territories.
It's like, they are still in medieval times. And if you bring, I think he brings like a flashlight and like stuff. And it's like, if you bring that, that's going to mess with like their development. It's going to kind of cause instability because like they're not supposed to develop flashlight technology yet or something. It's like each territory is kind of supposed to be on its own evolutionary path, and the thing that the travelers are supposed to do is like make sure that continues kind of as normal. And then the thing that Saint Dane, because they're also, it's like they talk about each book is kind of like, do they win or lose a territory? And winning and losing kind of just seems to be like Saint Dane is usually there creating, like pushing an already existing conflict to a breaking point, right? It's like things are already bad and he's making it real bad. And so can Bobby and his friends like solve the kind of socio-political conflict that like happens in each of these territories? And if they can, then they win the territory. And if they can't, then Saint Dane wins. And there's implied to be this sort of like breaking point where if he wins too many, then all the worlds end or something.
Right. Which we get into more specifics of his plan later on. But yeah, the turning point of the first book, The Merchant of Death, is on Denderon is the discovery of tack, which is this explosive compound that the Malago could use to get a leg up on the Bedouin and change the paradigm. And
this is a series with a lot of made up words. Sometimes sci-fi series kind of get away with just using our words in different contexts. So it's like, once you get, I think one of the really clever things is they kind of ease you into it, because in the first one, you only really know about this one territory. And so it's like, I'm just learning about this one other world. But by like the 9th book, you have 9 different territories worth of vocabulary that they are all mixing together, which makes reading a summary of it very confusing. But like when you've read all of those books, then you're taken, it's like you've been kind of eased into it enough that you're familiar with all of those things.
Right. And it's kind of explained that the travelers can just understand the languages they're speaking on other territories. Like they're not all speaking English. And at first when Bobby gets to Denderon, everybody's speaking gibberish, but as he starts to like stop thinking about it and just kind of absorb it, that's when his traveler power of understanding any language takes over. And I think that helps explain why some of the words are so like natural for English to understand. Like in the water territory, like the ships being called skimmers, and words that just kind of do make sense. In fact, the water territory being called chloral, it just sounds like a water territory.
Yeah.
What else stuck out to you about the first book, looking back?
I mean, I think the first one is interesting just because of, and this is true of like the first probably 3, is like, it starts out so isolated, which is just like, we go to this one place and we solve one problem. You know, like that's, and it could be, you could imagine a world where he writes like 40 books where everyone is just kind of like almost like Monster of the Week. Like you just go to a new place and you solve a new problem and then you leave and everything's fine. But like one of the most interesting things about the series is like it really gets more complicated very quickly. And so the first one is almost like quaint in retrospect versus what they become.
Yeah, totally. It's reading it among the other 10. It's one of my less favorites because it is so like setting the stage. It's kind of like what a default Pendragon adventure is going to look like. And then the weirder ones later on were more interesting to me. But jumping into the second one, the Lost City of Far, where they head to Chloral, where the discovery of this ancient city is possibly the turning point, and also the fact that all of these people are getting poisoned. But Chloral's basically this water planet where they have these cities built on floating barges, and Bobby is there visiting the traveler there, Spader, who will go on to be probably the traveler he becomes closest with out of all of them. Besties, Spader, whose dad is killed in the poisonings. And this book I loved and love because it is like the only one where in one of the journals he goes, for 6 months I lived on this barge and like worked and went out for drinks with people at the end of the night. And there's that like sense of time passing and that sense of being in the routine of the territory that was really fun.
The journaling mechanism, I feel like we should explain a little more maybe. So it's like the stories, each book is kind of told from a couple of perspectives, because you've got Bobby doing his adventure and that's the main thing, but the way you learn about that is like he has essentially, it's like he stops and writes down everything that he does after a certain point. He like it's in first person and he's like, I did this, I remember thinking this or whatever, and then he sends that through a kind of, he has like a magic ring and he sends that back to Earth to his friend Mark the nerd, and Mark reads it, and it's also like time is really screwy between the territories, and so Mark will get them, you know, like hours apart or whatever, but for Bobby it's been 6 months. So like he's been living here forever, or you know, it'll go like a long time without him receiving journals or whatever. But it's interesting because you know that he's not like, you know that Pendragon's not gonna die because he's writing the journals. They're always kind of like in past tense or whatever. But you still have this element of like you are reading them kind of almost as Mark, like experiencing these adventures secondhand.
Yeah, and Bobby will write his journals like young adult author named DJ McHale. He'll be like, something crazy has happened and I don't think anything's going to go back to normal, but let me just start at the beginning. You know, he'll tease.
He's very quippy, an incredibly quippy character.
He loves to quip. And I feel like in my head canon, he's coming up with those lines after the fact and pretending he said them in the moment. He's writing in his journal that he was cooler than he actually was. But yeah, that is funny. And like the fourth, usually there's 4 journals per book. And the start of the fourth one where it's like, did he win or lose? He's being coy about it for like no reason. In real life, you would go, don't worry about it. We did it. And here's how. But yeah, they amp up the drama. But I like that journal motif. I feel like that's part of why I fell in love with it as a kid, because you have the first person journals and the third person Mark and Courtney sections out in the real world, and it lends an interesting pace.
I mean, you really like it's. I think it totally makes sense that you kind of like associated with Mark while reading it, because the story is like you're a third person, you're a third friend experiencing these adventures like these other characters are.
Right, and like reading these journals that are in a different font than the real world stuff. The real world stuff is really plain, and then the journals are almost in more of a written font, which was just a creatively interesting decision. Like, I thought that was cool.
No, it's great. I mean, and like one of the things, and we'll get into this with the later books, but I think what I liked so much about this series and kind of thinking about it in retrospect is like each book is really using kind of an existing sci-fi or fantasy premise a lot of the time, but for me as like a adolescent reader, it was the first time that I was encountering that trope. So it didn't it was my introduction to a lot of these things that I later learned like this is kind of a classic sci-fi concept that he's playing with, and so they just felt infinitely creative, like really so different and distinct. And I think even now, knowing the tropes, like each world is so impressive in its own world building, and they have it doesn't feel like they're just kind of swapping out words or whatever. Like they really operate in different ways, and this water one in the second book is so radically different in like technology and class and everything than the first one that you're kind of like, all right, these worlds are completely distinct. They really they're not going to be like each other at all.
Totally agree with that. And I think that is part of why the weaker books in the series are when it feels like it's not like that, when it feels like, oh, this is a little too much like one we've already seen, which we'll get to those later. But anything else in the second one that sticks out to you before the tragic ending?
Right, because this is the one where Press dies, right?
That's right. He goes to the flume at the end, says, "First Earth." We'll get to that later. But the flume's already been activated, and what's coming through it is thousands of bullets, and he is gunned down before Bobby's eyes and dies in Bobby's arms.
It's a series that kills people, which I think that there were probably, the Hunger Games is obviously a series built on killing characters and whatever. But in that first book, the first time you encounter Saint Dane, he makes someone jump in front of a train, by mind controlling them in this really disturbing way. And so it always, obviously the kind of language of the book is very written for a teen reader or whatever, but it never felt like the content was kind of sanitized in any way. I don't know. I still, when I was reading them, I was like, these are intense. This is violent. This is where I am as a teen boy. It feels like exactly appropriate for how intense I want things to be.
Yes, definitely enough for there to be real stakes. One other thing to mention of these first two books before we move on is the other character we're getting introduced to in the modern day segments, the Our World segments, Andy Mitchell, who's kind of a school bully who discovers the journals and tries to report them to the sheriff, because Bobby's family went missing as soon as he disappeared. His family disappeared also, and Andy,
but they'd never existed. No one remembers them.
Right, except the police are investigating their disappearance. Most people just kind of accept it, but there is that investigation going.
Oh yeah, I guess, because it's their house disappears, right?
Yeah, which
okay.
It is weird that some people recognize that it's weird and some people don't seem to care. But yeah, Andy Mitchell brings the journals to the sheriff, and Mark just pretends that he was writing them as his own fan fiction, as a way of coping with his friend disappearing. And
there's a line that I have, it's I didn't need to be reminded of this, just one of those little lines that sticks with you forever, which is Andy finds the journal and he kind of reads it and he's this is BS, you made it up, to Mark. And it says if Mark had protested and said they were real, then Andy would have just kept believing they were fake. But instead, Mark was just silent. And Andy was because of that, kind of convinced of their realness, which was always just a very, it stood out in my mind of if he had protested and if he was just like, no, 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 they're real, I swear, then Andy would have kept thinking of him as like this nerd. But because Mark was just like, I don't know, think what you want, then he was like, oh, I guess they are real.
Right. And that is the explanation given within the book. But the reason I might not even remember to mention Andy Mitchell, if not for the fact that he's basically retconned in the 6th book to having been Saint Dane the whole time.
Is it the whole time, or is it a thing where he's like been killed and replaced? Because that also happens.
I was reading very closely trying to figure that out, and it's for sure he's talking about like their childhood together.
Oh.
Like he's been Andy Mitchell
weird.
for 18 years.
What a weird thing to do. to just like be a child growing up for 18 years just to kind of like mess with Mark and Bobby Pendragon.
It is weird. It's also kind of a brain tickler to think about him doing that like
simultaneously.
Yeah.
I mean, time just seems kind of screwy.
Especially when you're as powerful as Saint Dane. But that very much felt like a retcon because, like, oh, here's the villain we have for the outside world, and we have the villain for the Traveler stuff, so may as well make him one villain. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. It's just, like, funny to look back on those stories as, like, there's no chance he knew he was Saint Dane when he was, like, pretending to not know whether the journals were real or not?
Yeah.
Like, why would he even get involved? Why would he bring the journals to the sheriff? Like, what part of his plan is that? But anyway, book 3, we're getting to First Earth. This is the book called The Never War. First Earth is Earth in 1937. Second Earth is the modern day sections with Mark and Courtney in the early 2000s. That's Second Earth. And then Third Earth is like the year 5000?
Yeah, it's funny that it's like 1920, 2003, 5010. Like those are the time jumps.
Yeah. And
which, I mean, pretty optimistic, you know, for us to be still around and kicking in 5000, although
and thriving.
What Third Earth is changes significantly, like depending on what's going on with the books, which is another cool thing.
Definitely. Yeah, we see Third Earth for the first time in this one because they're trying to figure out something that happened in history. They're getting involved with like this crime lord, and they want to find out what happened to him, how he died. And so they go to Third Earth where it's this utopia, and they've built underground a lot so that they can preserve the nature on the surface. The New York Central Library is perfectly preserved, but there are no books in it anymore, or there don't need to be, because it's all like this computer that can pull up this perfect simulation of this guy, and this AI can answer all your questions and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically, it's like the whole first, second, Third Earth thing is kind of like the author wanted to do a time travel story too. You know, like he wanted to have this like dimension hopping adventures and different things, but then he also really wanted to write about kind of like determinism and like, you know, if you can change the events of history and whatever, because like the conflict of the third book, you know, not to jump too much ahead, is like they find out that if they save the Hindenburg from crashing, like if they avert the Hindenburg disaster, then Nazis win World War II, right? Like that's the central conflict, which is very much a kind of like, I feel like a Doctor Who-esque plot, you know, where it's like, we can't change history, or if we do, then things are going to get messed up. And it's like, it's very funny to have like medieval world, water world, don't change the course of history on Earth, or else World War will go in a different direction.
Yeah, there's an acceptable amount of casualties. Yeah, and it's like it's like the twist of the climax. They think they're going to save the Hindenburg, and then when they get there, they kind of realize, like, oh, we need to let this happen. And it does one of my favorite things, which is Bobby would still save the Hindenburg. He tries to stop the missile from going at it, but he's held back by the First Earth Traveler Gunny. And it's like, he lives with that knowledge that he would have done that to save those people, but the Nazis would have won World War II. And that's like... It's not his fault that didn't happen.
Yeah, I think as a kid, I think I didn't like this one just because I was kind of it felt more historical to me, and I wasn't like interested in that as much. But in terms of like, again, it's an introducing something that was already a sci-fi concept, but I had not heard of until now. It's like that sort of paradox of like you can't kind of, it's like the Sound of Thunder, like a Ray Bradbury thing. Like you can't change the past or else you mess up the future. I feel like this was the first place that I experienced that. And of course, that's kind of a key part of any time travel story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I personally liked this one a lot at the time, and I liked it rereading it. I do make fun of these books now for, they're being more kiddie than I remember them, just as far as what you're talking about with the quips and, being cutesy, and a lot of time spent on action, which is like not very thrilling for, knowing the outcome of everything. But I did read the section where he's stuck in the hotel room. To go back for a little bit, Gunny, the traveler on the Third Earth, is like the lead bellhop at this ritzy New York hotel. And so Bobby ends up staying on this floor that's in construction in the hotel and working as a bellhop and delivering food and stuff, which was a section I liked. But yeah, towards the end, he's stuck at the top, locked in this like penthouse apartment, and he has to make a rope out of sheets and dangle off the side of the building down to like a few balconies below where he can swing in. And reading that as an adult, my fingers were sweating. I was like, damn, this is affecting me. Yeah.
Was this the one? I know it happened on First Earth, but I can't remember which book it was, where they do the whole safety deposit box thing.
Yes.
Okay, because that was something that I thought was just incredibly cool, where it was like so First Earth is in the past, and so in order to, because maybe he loses his ring or something, there's some reason why like this is the easiest way to deliver something to the present, but like he needs to give something to Mark, his friend, in the present. And so he goes to a bank and basically puts all his journals in the safety deposit box. And then like 100 years later, Mark gets a letter that's like, hey, your friend Bobby told us to open this now. And like the knowledge that like they had been sitting there the whole time, like they had been in that box for the past like 100 years
during the first two books.
He knew to give it to him like after the first two had happened or whatever. It was just like, it was very clever kind of timeline tinkering.
I agree. And it is that fun twist on the format of real world journal, or Second Earth rather than real world. And then this one is like, he gets all the journals at once, and he just like, him and Courtney get snacks and say they're going to go work on a homework assignment, and then they binge read all of them. And you're binge reading all of them. It's those 4 journals in a row in the middle of the book. That twist on the format, I was like, it was clever. It's a like grounds you with the characters, I feel like. I think it's an interesting move.
Yeah, I mean, I am not a writer, and certainly not of this kind of book, but it's like, I think about writing just like 10 books in a series, especially one as kind of like high concept, but also kind of formulaic as this one. Like, I feel like it would just be exhausting. Like, I don't know how you kind of do that many. And so, seeing the author mess with the formula more and more, I think is one of the interesting parts of this series, because they, like we said, the first one kind of sets the template, and then they all proceed to break that a little bit more each time.
Yes, which brings us, of course, to book 4, the reality bug, my personal favorite.
Oh, also mine.
Nice, because this is the one that's wonderful. This is the one I was thinking of when you talk about sci-fi concepts that have for sure been done before, but we hadn't seen them before as kids. Mm-hmm. This one, the premise of the territory is that they've invented perfectly simulated virtual reality, like perfectly convincing, takes your thoughts, what you want to happen, like what would be a fun reality for you to be in, and just turns that into something that you're doing and feeling while you're laying in this casket and getting fed through tubes and stuff. Mm-hmm. And as a result of inventing that, this territory is like abandoned. He's going past all these abandoned shops and stuff because everybody's doing the bare minimum to then go into Lifelight, this VR simulation, and spend as much time as they can in there. Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really like, in my philosophy 101 class that I took or whatever, we talked about the kind of like hedonist thought experiment of like, if you could just get in a machine and the world would be exactly the same, but just like 10% better, and you wouldn't know you were in a machine, like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you just do that thing? Like, you know, if you forget everything and you can just have the world be better, like, do you even owe anything to anyone else? And this book is just that. It's just everyone has chosen to get in virtual reality and never come out. And we get, like, in the beginning that, like, Bobby goes in and you see how cool it is. You know,
Yes.
It's like he goes back and he's like living his normal life, but it's just better. And like, you know, he's in a basketball game and it's really close. And, you know, like all of this stuff happens that, you know, I think it makes it very believable of like, yeah, you could see why someone would just get in this and never come out.
And not that he dominates the basketball game and they shut him out or anything. It's like, yeah, it is close, and then he makes the game-winning shot. And there's all these details, like a pizza gets delivered to their house by accident in the morning, and his mom's like, well, I guess we may as well eat this for breakfast. And it is touching because he's back with his family after, you know, mourning their disappearance. He has no idea where they went still. That's a big mystery that's going on. And that section has stuck with me since I originally read it, probably more than anything else. I think about him waking up in that bed, because it doesn't go like, and then I entered Lifelight, and then the next chapter is him waking up in his bed. You're kind of confused for a second, almost what's going on. And he wakes up and he's saying, like, it's one of those mornings where every position you roll into is more comfortable than the last. And I still think about that all the time. I'm like, this is one of those mornings. That's just one of those lines that stuck with me. But yeah, it's very exciting, like, just for my imagination as a kid.
I
like,
mean, and I
concept.
think also it's like, you know, the obvious thing is like, this is the video game book. Like, this is the book about video games in kind of like when speculative sci-fi writes about video games as like the perfect recreation of the world or whatever. Like, this is that.
Yeah, it's almost Ready Player One meets Inception. To get people really
it's like Ready Player One, but good, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, without all those annoying references. Because the climax of this book is them going into the creator of Lifelight, Dr. Zetlin, his Lifelight jump, and like sieging his compound, like making their way up to where he is to tell him to like pull the plug on Lifelight.
It's so cool. Yeah, because it's like so the kind of the traveler from this territory has a and this is another really kind of fascinating part, is like she's developed essentially like a virus or whatever for the machines, where they are going to, like, you put it in the VR thing and then it's the same, except instead of perfect, it's kind of bad, still in a horrifying way. And so like Bobby goes through the same simulation, but it's like, you know, they're losing the basketball game, but also like his coach has a heart attack.
Right.
Like, it's like really kind of harrowing or whatever. And so the idea is like, you put that in there and then no one's going to want to be in these machines anymore because it's awful now.
But the intent is, because it's called the reality bug, the intent is to just like, he misses the game-winning shot. Like, it's less distinguishable from real life, so you may as well come live in real life. But then the issue is that it goes too far, to the point where he's like, yeah, his coach has a heart attack. He's being like attacked in his gym by the Quigs that we haven't talked about yet. Quigs, monsters that defend the flumes. St. Dane's creatures. They show St. Dane is there. They have yellow eyes.
Yeah, but so they have to go through in order to, is it in order to like use the bug, they have to convince the founder that the system's broken, or like, why do they have to reach him?
It might be because the bug has already gotten out of control that they need him to fully pull the plug. I don't totally remember, because I do remember them being chased by a physical manifestation of the
And it's also bug. I'm sure it's the first place that I encountered you die in the game, you die in real life, because like that's what starts happening, right? It's like,
as a side effect of the reality bug.
Which, again, it's like, that is such a trope, but it was like, this was the first place that I heard it, and I was like, that is crazy. I can't believe that if they die in the game, they die in real life.
Yeah, what a concept. Yeah, God, I loved this one. And what made me love it most of all, another reason it stuck with me forever, at the end, after they convinced Dr. Zetlin to shut down Lifelight, they come out for this big town meeting. Everybody's back out in real life. And the board of directors at Lifelight are basically like, it's not your decision, bro. Lifelight's going to keep going. Everybody's cheering. And you find out that somebody you thought wasn't Saint Dane was Saint Dane and was helping this happen. But they straight up lose the territory. It goes back to normal and they didn't do anything.
You know, kind of snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. It's just like, you thought you won, you didn't. This book, like everything that happened, just a loss. Like, you know, all of this was kind of for nothing.
Which is like, it's it's giving me chills right now just talking about it. Just how much that meant to me as a kid versus like a Harry Potter or whatever, where they beat Voldemort in every single book, one after each time. It's like, wow, they can lose? That deepens everything that's going on here.
Yeah. Another interesting thing is I mean, we haven't really talked about the other travelers too much, but like, one of the best ones is this woman named Lore, who's kind of a warrior. You know, she's like the one who can fight, you know, and later she like teaches Bobby to fight, but she's from kind of another, maybe more like less technologically advanced place, but he brings her here and like they plug her into the machine as well, because it's like, okay, if we're gonna go through this big obstacle course, we like need someone who can fight with us, which is very cool.
Right, and she doesn't need to be a gamer. She just needs to do her regular fighting.
Right.
But in the simulation. Yeah, and the last thing about the book 4 for me is the traveler Aja Killian, who works at Lifelight and can run Bobby's jumps and everything. She's like super, super smart, and there's an interesting payoff with her later, which is why I'm addressing her now. Anything else you want to say about book 4, our favorite?
No, yeah, I mean, we'll go into that payoff, yeah.
Yeah. Book 5, Black Water. This one on the territory of Elong, the first and only territory where its inhabitants aren't primarily humans.
It's very funny. It's like, well, it's exactly Skyrim logic. It's like, well, there should be one where they're cats. You know, like that's how it works.
One evolutionary tree. Yeah, the dominating force on Elong are called the Klees, and they're basically jaguars that seem to have opposable thumbs, like they're holding cups and plates and stuff and steering vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, they're as advanced as anyone else.
And that's what's trippy is when he gets there, he meets a human and he's attacked by it, and you realize it's got yellow eyes. Oh my god, the Quigs here are humans? St. Dane's Quigs here aren't beasts, but like before, but now they're humans? And you find out that there's this whole subjugated race called Gars that are the humans, who are pretty much non-verbal and are used to like harvest food and fight for the Klees entertainment and things like that.
They play like lacrosse, but then they're just like, it's like the cats are on essentially horses, and then they're just a bunch of humans like running around on the field, like not on horses.
Yeah. Which this one, there's a lot cool about this society. It's like treetop houses, because there are these little dinosaurs called tangs that live in the jungle and attack mercilessly, so they stay above them, and that whole society is kind of interesting. But as a whole, I was a little put off by this book because it's a little bit of Denderon vibes, the ruling class and the subjugated class, and then there's
I mean, I don't know how much to read into this, but it's like, it's the one book on Wikipedia that doesn't have a plot summary.
Interesting.
Like, it's like the Blackwater doesn't have an entry and the rest of them do. But I guess the big thing about it, and like the big kind of plot point, is you find out that actually, you know, surprise, the subjugated race of humans are like smart, actually, and they have this whole kind of technologically advanced oasis place. And so the the kind of finale of that one is like all of the humans going here, and then what is it attacked? How exactly does this one end?
Yeah, the Klees
okay.
are...
Well, this is actually, I think this is important, because what this one is the big turning point in is when they really start messing with the different territories. They start like, because as we said, it's like, Uncle Press was like, don't bring anything between territories. That's how to mess stuff up. And they had basically done that for the last 4 books. And then I think in this one, because Bobby was like, I'm sick of losing. Like, we lost the last territory. Why are we playing by the rules if we're going to lose? Right. There is this thing where Saint Dane is going to poison the like Oasis City with the poison from the second book. Like, I think that's the plot point. And so then they also bring antidote from another territory to it. And so it's like, it really feels like you're violating like the laws that you've learned you have to follow going between these, because they're like bringing all sorts of tech. And also this is the one where Mark and Courtney also start traveling between places themselves. Like, they also start dimension hopping, which they're not supposed to do because they're not travelers. And so it's like, the cool part of this one is that things start breaking down, and each book kind of has more intermixing of the territories than the one before it.
Yeah, and this is the first one where Mark and Courtney are straight up on Elong doing the climactic adventure with Bobby, which is fun. I feel like we haven't talked about the Mark and Courtney sections much because they're kind of hard to distinguish between books. You know, I could get any event mixed up with other ones. They're much lower stakes and kind of about how they're reacting to what Bobby's doing a lot, and how it's like stressing them out, and how they're taking this responsibility of being his acolytes. But reading them back, those were my favorite sections. Like, I really loved those characters and that kind of grounded aspect of this story. Like, never forgetting to remind you that it's real world with real world implications.
Yeah, and so then, you know, then having that moment where it's like the real world grounded part starts like melding into the more fantastical feels really exciting, because then it's like, you know, you had learned to think of them as so distinct, and then when they suddenly become less so, it really, you know, it feels kind of, you know, like a violation of what you thought was possible here.
Right. And they do win this territory, so to speak, but when they're leaving, sending Mark and Courtney through the flume like destroys it, because non-travelers aren't supposed to go through it, and it ends up trapping Gunny and Spader on Elong for like 4 books, maybe even 5. I think it's like till the end, till they get reunited. But yeah, that was like in some ways a more bleak ending. It was like,
well, yeah, because it kills the traveler from Elong. Yeah, and so it's another, it's like, you know, again, these books kind of becoming more complicated and more mature as time goes on, where it's like, you know, now even if you win, things seem kind of bad. You know, they're getting more complex and less clear cut.
Yeah. What was weird about this 5th one to me at the time and now is how it's kind of a primitive society. They have these wooden tree houses and things, but the invention they do have is helicopters that are powered by the sun. That's like the one exception, is that they can take these helicopters anywhere they want.
Yeah, and I mean that they're essentially, it is almost, you know, like Vietnam-esque in that they're like, it's like they're spraying basically napalm like out of them, except it's poison, and then they, you know, they have to get like the anti-poison or whatever. But yeah, it's like, it's really military imagery. And before, it's just like, we ride horses and we, you know, live in tree houses, and then you have like a fleet of helicopters coming.
Gosh, I didn't make the Vietnam connection, but that's really interesting. The Tangs attacking from the brush and whatnot. Much to think about. There's also a section in this one where Bobby, you know, is found out by the Clees. He's hiding from them just with the Traveler and her acolyte, who trusts him for a long time. And then he gets confused for one of the Gars and is stuck in Gar prison. And he spends a month there, which is a long ass time. And he's just like working out and going a little mad. Which I do appreciate those time jumps for a lot of reasons. And especially because if you don't have a time jump, God, these books are happening fast. And this kid's like still 16 in this one. He was 14 when they started, and he's like only a couple years older.
Yeah, because like years are passing on Earth, but yeah, for him it's just like, you know, flying through time.
Right. At the halfway point here, did you ever read the prequel spin-off books?
I read, it was interesting. I read one of them, and I believe it was one of my first experiences with like, I could kind of immediately tell it was not the same author. It took me a while to actually figure that out, but I was just like, why don't these read as fun? Like, why aren't they as interesting to me? And the reason is that like they were not written by DJ McHale. It was like, there were kind of other ghostwriters or whatever who were doing those, but they followed other travelers through adventures, right?
I never read them myself, so tell me if my grilling is past your memory of them. But yeah, they're outside of like the traveler stuff, right? Do they know they're travelers in these stories? Because it's set before the war, quote unquote.
I mean, this was probably the one that I only read once, so yeah, I don't know. It's like it had like an extra story from Velox and like an extra story from something else, but it was like, yeah, it was the prequel thing of like, it felt inconsequential. Like,
yeah.
Not only was it not as fun to read, but also it was like, well, I know what happens. Like, so I don't know quite why I'm reading this.
Yes, it doesn't sound like I really need to give those a shot, having been written by a different author and everything. And honestly, these 10, it was like a nostalgia thing in a large part. I don't think I'm going to reread them again before I die, but I'm certainly glad I did it right now.
No, but I do think this is something that I would like read the first one. Like if I have kids, like read the first one out loud and then be like, hey, if you want to take this, there's a whole series. Like I do think it's a really good, for the kind of establishing tropes or reasons that we've talked about. Like I think it's a good thing to kind of introduce someone to a lot of these kind of sci-fi fantasy concepts. And because they, like, you can grow up with the books that, like, as you get better at reading, the books kind of get more complicated.
True.
I think, I still think they'd probably be good for young readers, but maybe there's some objectionable stuff in them that, like, won't age well or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. But yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think it's like, I sure grew to love reading more because of them. Like, I would just sit in the porch and read these books over and over again. The first 3 or 4 was like, yeah, I'm bored. I'll just read this one again, even though I read it last week. Like, that's how much I love these. But book 6, now we're at The Rivers of Zada.
This one I liked, and not just because my grandpa bought it for me after saying Bobby looked like Michael Jackson. Because this one, another trope being introduced to, this one has the training montage.
Yes.
Like, this is the one where Bobby learns to fight, because they go to the place that Lore is from, Zada, and it's this kind of desert, like pretty harsh environment, and kind of everyone is a warrior or something. Like, I don't know. It feels kind of like in Game of Thrones. What was Jason Momoa's group?
Drag.
Do you know what I'm talking about? It's just a place where it felt like everyone's a warrior here.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's learned to fight. Maybe like the Spartans. I don't know. But sure. Bobby gets like really beaten the hell up in the beginning. And he's like, all right, teach me how to be a good warrior. And you have this great kind of like, he's taken to this training camp and they just like beat him up over and over with these really hard games of like, oh, he's blindfolded and he has to do stuff, or oh, they're not giving him water. And eventually, he gets strong, and then by the end of this book, he's like good at fighting. But it's like the Rocky theme would be playing during this. Like that's what it is.
Yes, and it made me retroactively appreciate, like, oh yeah, him fighting hasn't been a big part of the past 5 books. Like, he's had to solve the problems going on in more interesting ways than that, which I do appreciate. But yeah, him getting his ass kicked, he gets it kicked by Saint Dane. Saint Dane is in the form of like a powerful captain there, and he's like puts aside airs and just pummels Bobby. Like,
yeah, it's implied that like before, there have been times in the past where Saint Dane could have killed him and kind of didn't for whatever reason, like because he just wanted to keep him alive. And in this, it's like something snaps and it's like, oh, he would have like actually just beat him to death. Like he would have just killed him, and then something steps in. But it's another instance of the book kind of like raising the stakes of like, now the villain just wants to murder you in a way that maybe wasn't true for the first couple books.
Yes, and that's very fun. Yeah, another element that's interesting about this one is Bobby starting to move on past Courtney. It's been like years now, and their relationship just has not had time to bloom at all. And he starts to see Lore romantically, and they almost kiss in this one. And meanwhile, back on Second Earth, Courtney is finding her own beau, her own new Bobby, away at summer camp. And it's cool to me exploring, like, yeah, these people do have to kind of move on at some point. Like, their lives are just in such different places that they can't really save themselves for each other anymore.
Yeah, I do think it's definitely an instance of, like one of the more young adults, or like, the younger aspects of this is like, the fighting's cool, the stakes are cool. The way they write about romance is like, we almost kissed, like that's that's about as far as they go here, which again, as a like 14-year-old who wasn't kissing anyone, I appreciated it.
Yeah, it was speaking to us for sure. Bad news though about Courtney and her boy she liked, who I think was named Beau, her new beau. He's Saint Dane too. Everyone's Saint Dane. He hits her with a car.
Neither Mark nor Courtney can have any friends.
No. Yeah, he almost kills Courtney, and then we find out at the hospital that Andy Mitchell has healing powers. While at the end of this book, I believe it's Lore who's nearly been killed by Saint Dane, and then Bobby manages to heal her.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's, the travelers they're realizing they have more powers than they thought. This is another book where I don't remember the specific plot beats too much, but there's a lot of imagery that is just really stuck with me, because the whole problem here is like there's a big drought and there's no water or whatever. But then they find out that below the city there is just like an underground ocean, just kind of like the size of Lake Superior or whatever. There's just like water in a cave, and there are all these cool scenes where they're like boating around in this ocean under the ground, and then at the end of the book it somehow rises to the surface, I think, but there's like a massive flood, and that kind of solves the water problem. But just that imagery of like being in this giant ocean underground was always very cool.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else memorable about this one? I feel like I can go into my fan fiction version of it if you want to hear just a different writer's take.
So this was while you were waiting for this book to come out is when you wrote your fan fiction?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And I don't remember all that much about it. I remember it kind of introducing Zada, which we'd already been to in previous books, so I kind of knew what it was like. Going off from there, had a little gladiator Coliseum type match or whatever. But I remember my big twist was that Saint Dane gets killed in it.
Oh.
He gets killed, but they see his spirit fly up into the air. And presumably it's gonna, take form somehow else.
Mm-hmm.
And reading these books now, I've kind of called it with that, but we'll get into that later on.
How long was your fanfic? How many pages?
Couldn't have been more than 15.
Okay.
Certainly didn't finish it.
Yeah, because we can talk about this here. I didn't have any friends who were into this series, and it's still kind of weird to me that it wasn't bigger. I don't know what makes. I kind of want to blame the cover art, because I think the cover art is not good for the most part. But just why is the Hunger Games so big? Why was I loved Artemis Fowl, but it was I had tons of friends who read Artemis Fowl, and I didn't know anyone who read Pendragon, and I don't know what didn't it got 10 books, so he got to write the whole thing, but it did not feel like this kind of had the breakout success. And obviously there's never been a movie or TV adaptation or anything the way there are with other books.
Yeah, I think for a book series, it was pretty successful, of course, but I agree it didn't catch on. I think you might be onto something with that cover art, because the boy in front of the door was kind of how it was for at least the first 6 books, or different travelers maybe sometimes. But going back to them now, all the new cover art in the reprinting is literally just like a symbol that signifies kind of what's going on with the territory.
Right,
like
which is
fitting.
actually very Hunger Games-y. The way that the Hunger Games covers are just like the Mockingjay or whatever. I think it's kind of trying to emulate the new popular series.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But it does feel like a wasted opportunity with all of these completely different, lush worlds to have it be just this little thing that doesn't really tell you anything about why you should be excited. Book 7. The Quillian Games? Is book 7? Yes. Yes.
Here's here's talking about the cover art. This is one of the ones in my youth I was like, long hair is the way to go. Long hair is cool, and maybe part of that was because Bobby Pendragon, as he got older and more mature, his hair just got longer and his bangs are like more in his eyes as the books go on. Here's the trope that this book introduced me to that is now a classic. Bobby hates clowns. He says there are 2 types of people on this earth: people who hate clowns and clowns. That's a line from this. And it was like, again, a popular thing to hate clowns. But for me, this was like the first time that I was like, oh, it's a thing to like be scared of clowns.
Yeah, that I relate to. This one is one of the more interesting setups, I think, and again, something that's been done a bunch before but we didn't see ourselves, which was like people playing in these gladiator type games in a modern city for like modern amenities, for like food, for the ability to live. They're fighting.
Yeah, I mean, and should be said, I don't think it predated like Battle Royale, but it did predate the Hunger Games. Like this was before the super popular children fighting to the death series in a series of games.
Yeah, credit where it's due. Interesting little wrinkle is that one of the first thing that happens when he gets there is he's watching these games, which are televised. Like, they're a big part of the culture here, is everybody always watches these games and bets on them for their own food, for their own survival. He sees the traveler from Ibera, a territory we haven't been to yet, get killed, like lose one of the games and die. Which was an interesting twist. Before we meet, of course, the traveler from Quillian, Neverwinter.
Yeah, this is the one. Is this the one that introduces the Dados?
Yes, it is.
Okay, because that becomes a big part. This one I don't remember super well, in part because the Wikipedia summary of it is pretty short, and so I wasn't able to kind of relive this one as much as I was able to do with the other ones. I remember they've got those games where it's like it's very kind of like American Gladiator or something, like kind of CBS show where it's like they're like swinging big things at each other. It's like you're running on an obstacle course and someone's trying to knock you off with a big ball, but those balls have like saw blades coming out of it, so if you get hit, you die. It's
right.
It's a lot of kind of like game show, except you die if you lose sort of games.
Yeah, they're fighting on this platform that they're like controlling the balance of, this circular platform that they're balancing the weight on. It's, fitting with the clown thing is the architects of these games. Vigo and LaBerge are enigmatic, rich weirdos designing these games for fun. But to get back to the Dados, they're mechanical robots. They work to, they kill people who get out of line, basically. They're robots that Bobby has to fight with his little stun batons and what have you. But what was the main crux of this one? I don't even remember. I think it's like they are trying to preserve the history from before this was the dominant way of life, before everybody was playing these games all the time. They have this like cache of art and culture to reintroduce to the world, and protecting that as the turning point. But it ends up getting destroyed because, Neverwinter, the traveler from this territory, she's evil. She's evil. She's working with Saint Dane.
And then the other interesting thing, and why the dados are important, is that it's, we talked about Mark being friends with this guy who's the bully, and he turns out he's actually Saint Dane. And in this book, it's like Mark and Saint Dane like invent a technology that becomes the dados, right?
Yes.
Like that's so it's another it's kind of like it's messing with the timelines and messing with bringing things between territories where Mark and Andy create Forge, which is like a liquid metal thing that reads to me as like exactly like the thing that was in Transformers 2 or whatever, where Stanley Tucci makes like a Dr. Dre Bluetooth speaker out of nano machines. But yeah, so it's like, Bobby was essentially tricked into, or Mark was essentially tricked into making this advanced machinery that then Saint Dane uses to throw all of the territories into disarray, because the dados increasingly become the kind of military force for that like the books are fighting against.
Yeah. Mark's parents, this is going to be a sum of across a few different books as we get this whole arc, but Mark's parents, he believes, die in a plane crash, and not knowing Andy Mitchell is Saint Dane, Andy kind of goads him into going with Neverwinter, who he also doesn't know, not to trust, going back to First Earth with that Forge technology they've invented and selling it. And it changes the course of history. In the Second Earth sections, Courtney's waking up and her family has like a way more advanced computer than she remembers that's just like floating there. Her cat is a robot that speaks English to her. Like just waking up in that different world, where also dados are the dominant robot and they look like Mark for some reason, which I didn't really need. It's kind of a weird
we got it.
Yeah. But yeah, and then they end up going back to First Earth and having this like adventure where they go on this yacht to England, where they're going to sell the Forge technology, and on the way there they like have to find shoot, I reached the end of my memory of what they do on the barge, but there's a fun 1937 yacht adventure. The vibe.
Yeah, I don't remember. I feel like this book also suffers because it's like on the book 4, Velox had such a good, like, it's a series of games to get to the final place. Like that was kind of that book's ramping up. And this one is just another series of games. And so even though they're like interesting and different, and I think actually an interesting thing is Bobby realizes that the games themselves are just pulled from other territories. Like there's that weird lacrosse game that they played on Elong that's just here, and it's implied that like Saint Dane has basically just been bringing stuff from other territories.
Right.
But as just kind of as a book, I think I kind of felt like, all right, I've done the games thing before. Like I get it.
Yeah, but I think it is implied that the dados that are invented on Second Earth because of Mark going back and selling Forge and not being able to alter that after they find out they shouldn't, those dados are the ones on Quillian. Like the dados are a presence in all the books after this, and I think they are the same dados that came from that core invention. Book 8, The Pilgrims of Rain. This is on the territory Ibera. It's in a tropical island type of vibe where Bobby joins up with this group of young pirates, including the new traveler from Ibera, the son of the traveler we saw die in the 7th one. They go exploring to try and find out the origin of their world. Like there's this whole abandoned part of it, and they're trying to find out the history of what happened there, where these pirates are coming from, and the evil pirates and marauding. And that's when we find out, slowly but surely, that Ibera is the future of Velox. So it's like First Earth, Second Earth, Third Earth, except it's second Velox.
Which is nice that they did, because it's like, otherwise, why does Earth get 3?
Yes.
And all the other ones get 1?
Totally. I've had that exact thought.
It still doesn't quite make sense, but it is nice that there's more than one territory that has like 2 different time periods. And there's a cool, like, it's kind of like The Last of Us, in that the Velox, like the place that they go to, is like totally overgrown and kind of decrepit, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
Where it's like, we failed to save this territory, and eventually this place like totally broke down, and now they're like pirates here.
Yeah. And this is when we get the follow-up, I guess, the redemption of Aja Killian, who left this recording hundreds of years ago. That's like, here's the plan for how we rebuild Velox, after it all turns to crap like it's clearly going to in her era. And enacting her plan in the climax is like redeeming that loss of that territory in book 4, which I thought was a cool idea. How are you feeling at this point in the series? Because I feel like 5 and 6, they're teasing you're going to get a lot of answers. Obviously, there's been mysteries throughout the whole thing, but 7 and 8, 2 books where I expected to get far more answers than I got about the nature of the travelers and what's going on.
Yeah, I think so. And it doesn't help that this one is kind of another, like, primitive, it's like they're fighting with like bows and arrows, and it's kind of tribal and whatever. And at this point, it kind of feels like we've done this, 3 or 4 times at that point.
Yeah. Definitely was refreshing to be in a city on Quillian, to be in a modern type of environment.
There is, there's more cool stuff about, like, once again, Bobby is bringing, like, they're mixing the territories to fight Saint Dane, and we're starting to get, I think the next book really drives this home, but it's like the flumes, the portals that they travel through are starting to like crack. Like there are signs that they're like getting messed up, because you're not supposed to be transporting stuff between them in a really cool way.
Yeah, and you also kind of see those cracks forming when they first lose Velox. They see, as their flume flying through, they see like the images that they typically see on a flume journey. Every flume journey is a few minutes long, and he describes these weird musical notes and seeing images from these different territories. He describes the images as being like scarier and mixed between territories after book 4. So it's like you do get a sense of how this whole system is crumbling from Saint Dane's impact on it, and from them breaking the rules about it.
Right.
Which again is another thing you're still questioning. Who decided these rules, and why do they matter in this concrete of a way? And it was almost frustrating to still not know at this point in the series. Book 9 was the second Earth book. It's what was book 9 called?
Raven Rise.
That's right, because of course the cult of Ravinia is taking hold on Second Earth. I always felt like Second Earth was going to be the 10th book, was going to be the culmination of everything on the home territory, but it was interesting to have that twist and have it be kind of another loss at the end, but we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the classic, like, it's, when you're watching, I don't know, again, Game of Thrones, it's like the one before the season finale is actually when all the big stuff happens, and then the season finale is kind of the wrap up or whatever. But it's like this one feels kind of more momentous. There are like really, really big things that happen with this one, and then the 10th book is kind of wrapping everything up in a kind of strange way that we'll get to.
Right. This cult of Ravinia in book 9 is interestingly based on the flumes. There's Bobby kind of gives up being a traveler, which is supposed to have given way for a new traveler to rise, a new lead traveler, even since Bobby had become known as the lead traveler. He was kind of the head of everybody else. And so this traveler is working with Saint Dane to like show people visions of these different territories and use them as like promises of these fantastical lands of and proof of this universe that's bigger than they are, for the purpose of getting these followers. And eventually we find out their plan of putting these followers in these like beautiful towns of combinations of all the best of culture and luxury living or whatever, propped up by the non-usefuls, the people they deem not committed to making society a better place. Poor people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, kind of another like class struggle book, which has certainly been a theme throughout. This one has, I mean, it's like this one, it's interesting. It's like, it is the second Earth book, but also there is just so much territory hopping at this point, and we're jumping between more characters than before.
Yeah.
Like there's Patrick Mack, who I don't even
He's the third Earth traveler.
Right. Yeah, and it's like, we're getting perspectives more than just Bobby and Mark and Courtney.
Yes, and they're all together on Second Earth, like held captive by the new traveler at one point. An interesting twist is when they come back through the flume to this abandoned house that they've been using for like 5 books as their means of travel and their means of meeting Bobby as he comes out of the flume. Now the abandoned house is not abandoned. It's this mansion that's like dedicated to this cult, and you find out it's owned by the new traveler, obviously because he knows it's a flume and he like is wealthy enough to just buy that house. But yeah, it kind of ends with a twist in what we thought possible in this universe, or I guess an interesting new element.
This is, I think it's it's a very cool thing where it's like on Third Earth, so in the future, they learn that there's this thing called the Bronx Massacre. Is that it?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, and where like, but there's like not a ton of information on it, and so they're like, okay, we got to stop the Bronx Massacre, and then they go to this place where eventually, someone throws 12 people into a flume that's kind of going to an unknown location, and they're like, oh god, 12 people, that was the Bronx Massacre. And then like 2 days later there's a rally with 70,000 people and
70,000 people protesting against Ravinia,
right? And they kind of form, Saint Dane and the cult form this like massive flume under them, and the whole protest just gets like sucked into this thing. And so they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't avert 12 people, the Bronx Massacre. And then it's like, oh no, that was not it, this is it. And at the end, Bobby kills a guy.
Yes, which, like his fighting, was a moment where I said, he hasn't killed anybody up till this point?
It feels kind of like Batman rules of like, I don't have to save you. Like, he's definitely blown some people up.
Collapsed buildings they were in, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
He makes the decision to kill the traveler, like, throws him into the flume from the helicopter they're both in.
Right.
Which, do you remember if he is for sure dead? I forget if he ever comes back.
I mean, they kind of all come back at the end, but I don't know if he's one of them.
Yeah, because obviously it is a flume. It sent them somewhere. It didn't straight kill them, as much as it looked like to everybody else, like it was a massacre that would be remembered in history, and created that new version of Third Earth, which is like policed by the cult of Ravinia, and they're trying to like prevent the truth of the past from getting out through whatever people are like living in the rubble of New York.
Yeah. So then the final book is really, it's like it's big explanations of the concept of the travelers, and it's giant battles. And that's kind of like, that's the whole thing. Like, it's a lot of explanations, and it's a lot of just like big old fights.
Yeah, at the very end of the 9th book, Bobby is brought to this strange new plane he's never been to before, where he sees his Uncle Press again, as Uncle Press promised when he was dying that we'll meet again. He finally sees him again.
A very kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi-esque promise. Like, don't worry, you know, I'm gonna come back.
Yeah. And the whole, like you said, the whole first, like, 5th of the 10th book is answers to every question you've had. Which, let's try and sum up those answers. The place they're in...
You go first.
I'm trying to remember the name of the place they're in. But basically...
Solara?
Solara, thank you. That is this plane that is propped up by the souls of every conscious being. And that's kind of how these territories are linked, is they're from any dimension where conscious life has formed and people have used it to try and be good. Their souls have powered Solara and kept it alive. And you find out that these travelers are all the energy of Solara being formed into people. And that's why they can be healed and travel between territories at will, is because they barely exist in the first place.
Yeah, it's like they're not people. You know, the reason that like Bobby's family disappeared when he started traveling was because like he was kind of never a person. I'm not totally clear, but it's I'll tell you, when I was reading Reddit comments and whatever about this, people don't like this 10th book.
Really?
They don't like the 20 comments that I read on Reddit, so not representative, but like I think it's one of these things where there were so many mysteries and so many questions, and the way they are explained is a very kind of spiritual, kind of metaphysical thing of like, you know, they go to not heaven, but like, this other plane of existence that exists outside all the territories and is kind of like good or bad depending on how everyone's doing. And it's a very kind of spacey explanation. And I think, you know, particularly I think throughout it, like, it maybe felt like we were going to get a harder sci-fi reason for all of this.
Sure.
But I also think that's probably impossible by this point. Like, I have no idea what they could have done that wouldn't just be this.
Were you satisfied by it when you first read it? Do you remember?
I think I was not satisfied by the final battle. Or like the final series of battles, which we can, talk about. I mean, it's like there are so many. There are battles on Elong. There are battles on Third Earth. They do, I don't know what happens in this book.
Yeah, a lot. It's it end up finding the 70,000 who were banished and more, and who a lot of them have been hiding out at Blackwater, which is a good tying back. Blackwater being like the idyllic society that the Gars had founded in the book Blackwater on Elong. It ended up being a place where humans and them could coexist. They end up finding out throughout this book that on Third Earth, it's not all rubble. There are these cities for the Ravinians where they live these supposedly perfect lives, but if one of them goes out of line for a second, they get turned into ash by a Dado, and then things go back to normal. But obviously the more interesting stuff in this book is the culmination of the ideological battle that Bobby and Saint Dane have been having, which the core of that has been addressed in a conversation in all 10 books. I feel like they get into this with Saint Dane, where Saint Dane says, the people of this territory can't be trusted to make decisions for themselves because they all will turn to chaos. And so
again, concepts that are everywhere, and
Yeah.
and for me this was probably kind of the first, because it's like he's a fascist, like that's what Saint Dane is. It's like, the people cannot be trusted to control their own destinies, and not only will it be better for me, but it will actually be better for them if I dictate their behavior. Like they're just too dumb, and Bobby is the much more kind of democratic, like, actually, no, people are good, they're smart, you controlling their behavior is not what they want, and you can never have a good society if people aren't free, even if the material conditions that they're living under seem okay.
Right. And it's interesting because so much of the climax is spent Bobby picking apart Saint Dane's argument and saying, like, you're not actually acting on your beliefs because you've inserted yourself into their lives so much, and you are so clearly driven by control. Like, you're the king of them right now. Like, that's what's happening when we come into Third Earth here, is he's been, like, ruling these Ravinians for 3,000 years in this, like, giant palace.
Yeah, because I guess Saint Dane thinks that, like, left to their own devices, they will seek to be controlled, right? Like, that's right. It's like, the natural order of you humans is to be ruled by someone greater like me, and then Bobby's like, well, you haven't let them do their natural order. You've been messing with every timeline. Like, if you just left things alone, you wouldn't have got to this point.
Right. And I think the Solera stuff worked for me because it ties into that core battle. It's like, yeah, very good versus evil. How do we materialize a good versus evil battle and have that have actual, like, the resources of good, the stockpile of souls of people who still believe and are building something.
It's like, what if good versus evil was like an RTS?
Yeah.
And you had resources, and you were building people. And I mean, there is this very climactic and very kind of cinematic final battle where he and Saint Dane just kind of punch each other a lot, but they're punching each other, like, between the good and the evil world. And, like, whenever Saint Dane hits Bobby, you kind of get a glimpse of what his Solera looks like, and it's, like, dark and horrible, and there are these, like, big creatures that are, like, flying around or whatever, and then Bobby punches him back, and it's back to kind of the good world. Like, it's very, writing that, I kind of feel like he was like, one day this is going to get turned into a movie and it's going to look great.
Yeah, that would be cool. But yeah, I liked how they were able to kind of write the ending for Saint Dane, who has been killed maybe before this book, but certainly in this book, he's killed and he just comes back, and it's like, yeah, that's not going to do anything. How, and asking the question of then how do we defeat that person is obviously very interesting, and more interesting usually than how they actually end up defeating him.
Right. And so, after they punch each other a lot, they kind of, it's Bobby saying your ideology is bad, and he kind of wins the fight. But, like, the real victory is they, like, go up to this balcony, and you see, this, like, massive army of Dados, just like a sea of robots ready to kind of, like, come and incinerate all of the resistance, but they're all just turned off. And as it turns out, the Ravinians, who were theoretically Saint Dane subjects, actually just went and, like, turned all the robots off. And it seems like a kind of, it's an interesting kind of, like, I don't know, anti-collaborator stance or whatever, where it's like, this is the equivalent of like if Germans in the war sabotaging their own army's tanks or whatever. Like, they ultimately decided, we don't want to be party to your genocide, even if you are theoretically doing it, like, in our name. And Saint Dane sees that, and he breaks. He just kind of, he realizes that he's lost in a more comprehensive way.
Right. He doesn't have the faith that he is backed by, like, the negative energy that he's been backed by for so long. And it's also set up that he's defeatable in this one because he spent so much of it making that flume. Like, that takes energy of your corresponding home world. And so in this one, they're using the little power left in Solera to do their own cool Traveler stuff. All the flumes are destroyed now, so instead they're using Solera energy to just wish themselves between territories. They're just like, not just in the last fight, they're constantly like, whenever they need to be on a different territory, they can just close their eyes and imagine it, and they're there, which is a really fun power boost for them to have. And Bobby turns into smoke in this one to go underneath the door. Like, he learns how to shapeshift.
Right, well, because there's been this thing where it's like Saint Dane has sometimes also turned into like animals, right? Like
Ravens.
a big bird or something. Yeah, of course. And so it's kind of like, well, why does he have all these powers if the other travelers don't? And what they eventually find out is like, oh, they kind of do. You know, they just, maybe they haven't leaned into them as much, or maybe it's kind of evil to use these, you know, who knows?
Yeah, and at this point, when they have such little power left, they're like, every time you need to use it, you got to really think about it. You got to really be sure you need it, because it's our finite resource left. And maybe things would have gone better if they let them have all these powers when they had a huge stockpile of energy to use them with. But I understand there's probably a big, I don't know, probably book 6 or 7 he came up with the ending or whatever. But yeah, I thought this one was a fun culmination because of that jumping around between territories, and every traveler is involved. Every traveler is in Solera at the start of the book, seeing their family again. Like,
yeah, including like the ones who've died, like, you know, Press is back. Like, you know, it's...
Yeah.
Oh, I guess we talked about that with the Obi-Wan Kenobi. But it's... Everyone's back. I mean, at one point... Remember when Gunny gets his hand cut off?
Yes. Gets mailed to our heroes at some point.
There's a lot of stuff that happens to the other travelers. And so to kind of all be back in the celestial plane is a real, you know, kind of like a nice reunion, especially because they'd either been dead or they just hadn't seen each other in like a really long time.
Yeah. And I'm kind of a sucker for that. I think there's a limit to how much you want to like just kill off characters and have them come back, and then you stop caring when anybody dies because you know they're just going to come back. But I like this, like, undoing some of the tragedies that you've been reading about.
And also, Courtney and Mark have fully kind of self-actualized at this point, and they're like leading battles on their own, and they're kind of, you know, it's like they have all grown into characters where it's like, you know, their flaws or whatever, they've now worked through them, and so they're able to essentially lead armies is like what what happens in this book.
And because they got sucked in with the 70,000 people. They got sucked in at that same time, and they're like 6 years older than Bobby now. And Mark is ripped, and he doesn't have his stutter. He's not nervous anymore. He's like this badass leader.
He got cool,
which was very exciting for me as a Mark stan.
Yeah, and it inspired you to get ripped.
Yeah, any day now.
So then they win, but there's still this like weird lingering thing of like, well, they don't exist. Like, the travelers are just kind of energy. They're not corporeal. And so they all kind of, at the end, it's like they all just kind of poof. Like they kind of turn into, you know, good energy or something, and some of them are really excited to do that, and some are not, and Bobby obviously, you know, is has the most reservations of all, because he seems like the one who kind of has the most connections with people.
Yeah, and he has this conversation with Uncle Press where Uncle Press is really trying to convince him there's nothing scary about this. Like, you're going to pass on and you're going to be chill and happy forever, but there's just no reason for us to like have these spirits pretend to be your family again. Like, you go back on Second Earth and live as a Second Earth citizen. You never really were one.
Which feels, you know, very much like the end of this book gets really kind of like big statements on life, which I think, you know, you should do at the end of like a 10-page or a 10 book, probably, you know, like 5,000 page series or whatever. Like, it's, it earns it, but it's like, this is press talking about death. And earlier it was Bobby talking about like how people should live in these like really big ways. So it feels very grand at the ending.
Definitely. And last thing before we get to the epilogue, the last hanging thread is, I believe they talk about Saint Dane's origin in that first part of this book. And they talk about how him and Uncle Press used to be friends, and they also were always just like spirits of Solera, made by real people at some point, putting that energy into the universe, but they are just from Solera, and everything they've ever done are just them taking form from that. And Saint Dane, I believe, is named Saint Dane because he was like a saint. Like, he was good initially, and he did have good intentions. But then by the end of this book, he's so far removed from them that he's getting called out. He's getting canceled. The epilogue was really unexpected for me. It's so much more open to interpretation than the rest of these books are, which I thought was a bold move, and I would have loved if I finished reading them when they came out. That would have probably also been very creatively stimulating to me. I guess the best way I can describe it is we are third person after Bobby makes the decision to move on. He's not going to hold on anymore. He's ready to become part of Solera again. We now see Bobby on the day he was going to leave for his basketball game at the start of The Merchant of Death. And he goes to his basketball game and he wins it, and he starts dating Courtney, and they graduate high school, and their lives are just continuing without any Traveler stuff happening. Bobby's floundering, not sure what to do with his life. And then he says, one thing Bobby always loved doing was telling stories. So you're like terrified at this point. You're like, are they really going to say Bobby wrote these books and that's the ending? Which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but it is kind of a fake out.
Well, and I want to correct you just a little bit.
Please.
The way that it starts almost exactly like the first book, where it's like Bobby opens the door and Courtney's there and he says like, yo, and it's awkward. But then it's revealed, like, after like a page of that kind of parallel conversation, that they're both like 80 and they've been living together. So it's like, right. It's a fake out where you think it's just starting over, but actually it's starting almost at the end of their life after they have, lived their whole lives together or whatever. So it it feels like, oh my gosh, are we going back to the beginning? It's like, actually, we're going to basically Bobby's deathbed, and he's telling us about his life now.
Yeah, after he's lived a full life with Courtney. Another interesting element to me of this whole timeline is Mark meets a new character and marries her named Marie, the name of my partner. And the closure after calling myself Mark the Nerd on those forums all those years ago, and now I find out that he married someone with my current partner's name at the end. That was like such a weird twist on a twist.
Yeah, but also don't keep following Mark's path, because then he dies like fairly young.
Yes. And
but like not in a supernatural way, just in a like sometimes people die. It's like all the supernatural elements of this are removed, and it's basically like, what if you just wrote like 7 pages about kind of someone's life? Because as you were saying, Bobby becomes essentially like a journalist. He
right.
he kind of writes about like people in need, and is kind of implied to like he's helping through illustrating their stories.
Right. And I think having Mark die at age 50 or so is an interesting move that serves the purpose of showing you that this isn't heaven or anything. This isn't some idyllic version of what could have happened. This is, to me, it's almost just what would have happened. If you're curious, here's what would have happened. But then at the end, some mysterious figure appears and drops off a box of all the journals for Bobby and Courtney to read.
And the mysterious figure is like almost certainly Uncle Press, like, kind of dressed the same way. Bobby recognizes him, but is like, that's impossible. It couldn't be.
Right. And that's kind of where it leaves us, is when he starts to read those journals in this alternate version of events after he's mourning the loss of the life he wanted but never truly was supposed to have. What did that mean to you? Why did it end like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like, I guess in the kind of, it's interesting that this series has been kind of toying with like multiverse theory, but only in that there are like 10 and not infinite.
Yeah.
And so this feels very much like that. This is what happened if, on the universe where Bobby didn't follow Press to the subway station or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it's kind of a... I really don't know what to take from it.
That's what I love about it.
Like, it's very enigmatic, and it gives Bobby the chance to say, "And so we go," one last time, which is kind of his catchphrase and what he says through like thick and thin. There's also the reappearance of these French fries, which like every book just talks about how good these French fries are.
Garden poultry fries, which they never eat with ketchup or anything. They just eat by themselves and are apparently so good.
Yeah, but it's it feels very kind of like late Dark Tower Stephen King to me, where it's like the kind of writing yourself into the story gets more and more explicit. Like, I don't know if you've read these, but it's like they meet, like, Stephen King is a character in the Dark Tower,
right.
Like the writer Stephen King. And they're like, you're writing these books or whatever. And so it's like, this feels very much like DJ McHale kind of attempting to come to terms with this giant series that he wrote. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think as a kid, I liked it because I was just like, I kind of don't know what this means. This is very mysterious. Exactly.
It's really creates interesting emotions, the way it's like kind of closure for Bobby, the way it feels as if it's just giving his spirit the sensation of completeness, when it is a very odd ending to have him just turn into nothing at the end, not really die, but certainly not really go on to live. And it's almost just like a tonal closure in a way.
Yeah.
But the reintroduction of the journals makes it weird, like what's logically really happening here.
I think it's smart to know that if the books just ended with like Bobby turning into energy, that would have been kind of hard. Like that would not have felt satisfying, even though it, you could say that it was like a meditation on death. We would have been like, well, that's it. Like he just turns into, water.
Yeah. Well, gosh. Anything left to talk about? Anything in the Mark and Courtney plot lines that didn't come up?
No, I mean, it is, as you said, it's interesting that there's this kind of teased romance with Lore, but at the end it's like, no, actually it was Courtney all along.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like, it is such an ambitious series, and I feel like the books that I read as a kid, there were, series went in kind of one of a couple ways, where there were either like 3 really good books, or there were like 60 of them, like Animorphs or whatever. And it's like, I liked Animorphs, but it was kind of like you could read them out of order. It wasn't super important. And so for this to kind of be this really big, really, like contingent on you reading them all in order series, and like end fairly, conclusively and satisfactorily, it feels kind of unique. I can't think of many other books that have pulled that off in the same way.
I agree. And I think it is definitely notable that, for me, I did feel satisfied by the explanations. All these questions that, dropping off this series as a kid, these are questions I had for almost 20 years of where do the travelers come from? Why do they always arrive everywhere at exactly the right time? Like, who's in control of that? I found the answers conclusive and satisfying and, didn't leave open ends. I didn't have unanswered questions at the end, which was impressive to me.
I'm looking up what DJ McHale has done.
Are you afraid of the dark?
Then he's directed TV shows, and then he has a series called Morpheus Road.
Yes, in the copies I got of the Pendragon books, at the end of the last 5 of them is reader beware, you're in for a scare, in DJ McHale's new series Morpheus Road, and then it's the first chapter.
That's very funny.
Yeah, I got to read that first chapter every time.
Yeah, well, that's Pendragon.
That's
should
Pendragon.
they? Okay, here's my question. You are an HBO exec, and I've handed you, $200 million.
Yeah.
Should they make this into a miniseries, into a movie, or is it in a lot of ways it is very visual. The concepts seem like they would lend themselves really well to that. But is this kind of the thing of the screen adaptations would never live up to what the images that the books have painted in your mind?
I thought about that while reading them for sure. I think it's hard to picture them condensing multiple books into one. You could kind of do that with Series of Unfortunate Events and have it make sense. But here, it being... You can't have 3 different planets in one movie or whatever. It's really hard to picture establishing all those different societies, and then here's the conflict, and then here's the climax for 3 whole planets with all these different distinct cultures on them. I would love to see it, certainly. And I would love to see how they adapt it more than anything. But it's hard to picture, especially with it not being that smash hit of a franchise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious now, if there are kind of teens reading this, given that the last book released in 2009 and it doesn't seem to have had that much of a cultural, grip. Are there kids, my age, or, when I was in 6th grade, are there kids like me still kind of picking this off the shelf, or have they just totally been replaced by other YA series? I don't know. Gotta interview some 6th graders.
I'm also curious if anybody listening to this, what the ratio is of people with context.
If anyone is listening to this.
Yeah. 2-part question there. Yeah, but God, I love these books. Final question. Do you think you or I are more likely to make a video essay about this series first?
You, because you have I would need to reread all of them. I could see myself maybe making an essay on just here are the books that I loved as a kid, and this would go on there. But yeah, no, I would need to do a full series reread, which I could do because all the books are still at my parents' house.
To be honest, I feel like I would have made one already if not for the sheer question of how do you do visuals for a video when you're talking about books.
Right.
One book series.
Gosh,
that's why they need
hard
to make it into movies.
Yeah, please, for the video essayists.
Yeah, exactly. This is, to me, closing a big chapter of my life. I'm moving on to part 2 of Leo's life after recording this conversation. Seminal books.
I'm so glad. I had not thought about these books in years, and reading all the plot summaries again and whatever, it's incredible how much imagery there is still in my mind, and how many specifics I remembered from all of them, despite it being, probably more than a decade removed before I had actually read any of them.
Yes, for me, totally same. Burned in there. Those interesting ideas. I'm going to give the Pendragon official sign off here. Thanks for listening, everybody. Ho be ho, let's go.
Let's go.